Something breaks when the empath goes quiet. Not immediately. The avoidance system, when it finally achieves the distance it has been engineering, experiences what it always experiences in the first hours and days of successfully created space: relief. The particular familiar, deeply grooved relief of pressure lifting, the alarm quieting, the ambient cost of another person's genuine presence and genuine investment, reducing to something the system can manage without effort. The walls back up, the interior private again. This relief is real. It should not be minimized or reframed into something it isn't. The avoidant genuinely feels it. It functions as confirmation that the distance was right, that the self-sufficiency holds, that the system's recommendation was sound, and then something else arrives. Not dramatically, not with the clean, legible quality of a feeling that announces itself, more like a weather change that happens before you notice you are cold. A gradual quality shift in the texture of ordinary days, a flatness that was not present before, that cannot be attributed to anything external, that does not respond to the usual remedies of productivity and routine and the forward momentum of a well-managed life. The collapse is not a breakdown. From the outside, it is invisible. The avoidant continues to function, goes to work, maintains the routines, engages with the world in the ways they have always engaged with it. But something underneath the functioning is different. Something is absent that was present before. What the empath's presence actually was. The empath, who was pushed into silence, was not simply a source of warmth or companionship or the ordinary comfort of intimate connection. They were something more specific, more particular, more irreplaceable. In the specific way that genuine things are always irreplaceable, they were a witness, not a passive one, the active, attentive, genuinely seeing kind. The kind that notices the specific texture of who you are, not the managed version, not the self-sufficient performance, but the actual interior. The wound and the intelligence and the humor and the specific, particular combination of qualities that constitutes a real person rather than a social presentation. The empath saw that, not because they were trying to see it, because seeing is what empaths do, because the specific attunement that characterizes genuine empathic capacity, the ability to feel the room, to read beneath the surface, to register what is present rather than what is presented, was simply operating and being seen, actually accurately, without the seeing being weaponized or used as leverage, is something the avoidance life does not typically contain. The absence of it, once experienced, has a specific quality, not the absence of something pleasant, the absence of something necessary. The collapse is the recognition of that necessity arriving in the avoidance experience without the buffer of the empath's actual presence to make the recognition manageable. Why the empath, specifically not every departure, produces this. Not every silence creates this particular quality of collapse. The avoidant has created distance from many people, has pushed away warmth, has managed back intimacy, has engineered the space that the alarm demands with practiced efficiency. And the aftermath of those distances, while not without discomfort, has followed the expected pattern. The feelings diminished. The specific person receded into the vague residue of someone who was once significant and is now simply part of history. The baseline restored. The empath's silence does not follow this pattern, because the empath was not offering ordinary warmth, was offering something the avoidance system had no established category for. Warmth that did not carry the specific cost signature that all previous warmth had carried. presence that did not lean, care that did not require reciprocation to sustain itself, attention that was accurate without being invasive, love that was real. The avoidance system, scanning for the signals it was built to respond to, kept finding them reduced, kept finding the specific, relief-producing quality of closeness that did not feel like a trap, and slowly, without authorization, without conscious decision, something in the avoidance interior reorganized around the empath's presence, not dependence, not the engulfment the system was built to prevent. Something quieter and more fundamental. The experience of being accompanied without cost. When the empath goes quiet, genuinely, not as strategy, but from the exhaustion of sustained generosity that was not adequately returned, the accompaniment is gone, and the avoidant, who did not know they were being accompanied in the specific way the empath was accompanying them, discovers its absence. The specific quality of the collapse. The collapse has particular features that distinguish it from ordinary grief or ordinary adjustment to loss. It arrives with confusion. The avoidance system, which has successfully processed other departures, does not have an established protocol for this one. The distance was created. The distance was supposed to produce relief. The relief came. And then something else came that was not in the plan. The confusion is the system encountering data that does not fit its model. The prediction was, distance produces relief. Relief produces equanimity. Equanimity produces the return to baseline. The data says, distance produced relief, and also this unnamed thing that is not going away. This specific gray that has settled over the texture of ordinary days, it arrives with the intrusive specificity of memory. Not the general memory of a period with someone, the soft-edged recollection of a relationship. The specific memory, the particular quality of the empaths, attention in a specific moment, the specific way of being with them that existed nowhere else and is not available in the current landscape of the avoidance life. That specificity is the problem. General loss responds to general remedies. Specific loss has no general remedy. The only thing that addresses specific absence is the specific presence, and the specific presence was pushed away. It arrives with the uncomfortable awareness that the distance was not circumstantial, that the system ran its protocol, and the protocol produced this, the empath's silence, the specific absence, the gray as its outcome, that this was made, what the empath is experiencing. This has been left out of most conversations about this dynamic, and its absence is itself a form of distortion. The empath is not simply the absent figure whose silence produced an interesting interior event in the avoidant. The empath is a person who gave something real, who brought a quality of presence and attention and care that was genuine and was costly and was not adequately received. The empath's silence did not arrive from strategy, from the specific exhaustion of someone who gave generously for an extended period into a dynamic that did not return the generosity in proportion, who calibrated themselves, managed their expression, made themselves smaller and more receivable and less threatening, and watched the avoidant create distance anyway. The silence is what happens when the reaching finally, genuinely runs out. Not a tactic, not a move. The honest limit of a person who has been giving from a finite resource without adequate replenishment, that depletion is real, has its own weight, has its own grief. Not only the grief of the loss, but the grief of having given that much, and received that little. The specific, quiet injury of sustained generosity meeting sustained insufficiency. The empath in the silence is not waiting, is not monitoring the avoidance collapse with satisfaction, is doing something harder and less dramatic, is beginning the slow, unglamorous, genuinely necessary work of returning to themselves, of redirecting toward their own interior the quality of attention they have been bringing to the avoidance, of rebuilding, one ordinary day at a time, the fullness that the dynamic drew down, not as prelude to the avoidance eventual return, as the actual, central, most important thing happening in this dynamic, the truth about what happens next. The avoidance collapse may produce reaching. The recognition of what was lost, arriving through the specific grey of the empath's absence, may become urgent enough to override the management protocol. The reach may come, oblique, qualified, deniable, as all avoidant reaches are, but genuine. Or it may not. The collapse may happen privately. The recognition may arrive and be managed back down. The grey may be lived with, rather than acted on. The system may find new scaffolding, new narratives, new ways of containing the recognition without converting it into action. Both outcomes are real. Neither is within the empath's control. What is within the empath's control is simpler and more immediate. The quality of their own days, the investment in their own life, the honest present tense, happening right now decision to be genuinely in their own experience, rather than in the monitoring of what the avoidance collapse will eventually produce. The empath went silent because the reaching ran out. Now the silence can become something different, not the silence of depletion, the silence of someone who is genuinely, fully, for the first time in a while, here in their own life, with their own attention returned to the place it was always supposed to live, not waiting for the collapse to produce action. Living, that is the whole of it. The collapse is theirs. The life is yours. Be in it. Why avoidance? Collapse after pushing empaths into silence. Continued. The collapse has been described. What produced it has been named. The specific quality of the empath's presence, the witnessing without cost, the accompaniment without demand, and what its absence reveals to the avoidant about what they had been receiving. What remains worth saying is not more analysis of the collapse. It is something more direct about what this dynamic actually cost the empath, not as background context for the avoidance experience, as the primary subject. The empath's particular exhaustion, the exhaustion that produces the silence, is not ordinary tiredness. It has a specific quality that is worth naming accurately, because it is frequently misunderstood by the empath themselves and by anyone observing from the outside. It looks from the outside like giving up, like losing interest, like the relationship simply running its course in the way that relationships sometimes do. From the inside, it is something else entirely. It is the experience of having extended a very particular kind of resource, not just time, not just emotional energy in the generic sense, but the specific costly resource of genuine empathic attention into an environment that could not reciprocate it, of having brought the full quality of perception and care and presence to a dynamic that received the care without returning the specific quality of being cared for in kind. The empath can feel things others don't feel, can perceive the wound beneath the behavior, the love beneath the distance, the genuine interior of a person whose exterior is carefully managed, can hold another person's complexity With unusual patience, this capacity is real. It is also finite in ways the empath does not always acknowledge until the finitude announces itself through depletion. The silence is the finitude announcing itself, not a decision. A limit reached. What the empath gave there wasn't named throughout the avoidant dynamic. The empath gives specific things that are rarely explicitly acknowledged, not by the avoidant and often not by the empath themselves, who has learned to give without requiring acknowledgement as a condition of the giving. They gave accurate perception. The specific, effortful, requires genuine attention perception of who the avoidant actually is, not the surface presentation. The real person, the wound and the intelligence and the specific way they think and the particular humor and the interior that the management protocol was built to keep private. The empath saw it, held it, responded to it without flinching. That perception was a gift, a significant one. The experience of being accurately seen, not managed or fixed or processed, simply seen, is not common. The avoidant, who has spent years successfully preventing accurate perception, received it from the empath without fully acknowledging it as the specific, extraordinary thing it was. They gave patience that was genuine rather than strategic, not the patience that is really just suppressed urgency. Real patience, the kind that comes from genuine understanding of why the withdrawal happens and genuine compassion for the wound that produces it. The patience of someone who could see the fear and chose repeatedly and at real cost to stay soft rather than to harden. They gave a specific quality of safety. The safety of being with someone whose response to the avoidant's most defended places was not recoil or pathologizing or the specific weight of being someone's project. Simply presence. The safety of someone who encountered the full truth and remained. These gifts were real. They were costly. They were not adequately received, not because the avoidant was cruel, but because the avoidance system was not yet capable of fully receiving what was being offered. The capacity for genuine receipt requires a kind of openness the management protocol specifically prevents the empath gave into that prevention for a sustained period without adequate return. The silence is what honest accounting of that investment eventually produces. The second, injury, nobody talks about. There is the primary injury of the avoidant dynamic, the experience of loving someone who cannot consistently receive the love. The withdrawal, the distance, the specifically painful experience of genuine connection being followed by managed absence. That injury is real, and it has been documented thoroughly throughout every conversation about this dynamic. But there is a second injury that receives less attention, that sits underneath the first one and is, in some ways, more lasting in its effects. The second injury is what the dynamic does to the empath's relationship with their own capacity. Because the empath's deepest gifts, the perception, the attunement, the genuine seeing, were, in the context of this dynamic, consistently met with the avoidance retreat. The most genuine expressions of who the empath is produced, the most predictable withdrawal, and over time that pattern installs something. The quiet, unannounced, never explicitly taught belief that the fullest expression of their genuine capacity is the thing that drives people away. That loving deeply is the problem. That the specific extraordinary quality of genuine empathic presence is not an asset in love, but a liability. This belief is false. It is the product of a specific dynamic, one in which a particular person's system was configured to experience depth of genuine care as threat, being generalized into a conclusion about the empath's worth in intimate connection. But false beliefs installed through sustained experience are not dissolved by understanding alone. They require new experience. The specific, repeated, accumulated experience of bringing genuine empathic capacity to an environment that can actually receive it, where the depth of perception produces connection rather than retreat, where accurate seeing is welcomed rather than fled from, where the full quality of empathic presence is not a cost to be managed, but a gift genuinely received. That new experience is what the silence makes possible, not because it will necessarily produce the avoidance return, but because genuine disengagement from the dynamic creates the space for different experiences to occur. For the second injury to begin its own healing through the accumulated evidence that the empath's capacity is not in the general landscape of human connection. The problem it was in this specific dynamic. What the silence actually opens, the silence that exhausted the reaching, is not only an ending, it is, simultaneously, the opening of something. The attention that was going toward the avoidant, toward reading their signals, tracking their temperature, calibrating expression to their capacity, understanding their interior with unusual depth and unusual accuracy, that attention is now potentially available. Not automatically, not through a decision made once, but available in the way that things become available when the primary demand on them has reduced. Available for the empath's own interior, which has been, in many cases, significantly underattended relative to the avoidance. Because the empath's capacity for attention is genuine but finite, and when it is primarily directed outward toward the complexity of another person's defended interior, there is less of it available for the honest, patient, genuinely curious examination of the empath's own experience. The silence creates the conditions for return, not to the avoidant, to the empath's own interior, to the questions that belong to their own life, to the honest examination of what they want, what they need, what they have been giving, and what they have been receiving, and whether the proportions have been serving the life they are trying to build. This examination is not dramatic, does not arrive with revelation or sudden clarity. It is the quiet, ongoing, ordinary work of someone who is turning their quality of attention toward their own experience and finding, gradually, that their own interior is as complex and as worth attending to as anyone else's. That finding is significant, particularly for empaths who have organized their identity around attunement to others, who have developed the perception and the patience and the capacity for genuine seeing, primarily in the direction of other people, for whom the inward turning of that attention is less familiar, more effortful, requiring the specific practice of treating their own experience as worthy of the same quality of interest they bring to everyone else's. The honest ending of this, the avoidance collapse, is real. The empath's silence produced it. The recognition of what was lost is arriving in the avoidance interior with the specific weight of something that the usual management tools cannot resolve. None of that is the point. The point, the actual, central, most important thing, is the empath, right now, in the ordinary hours of an ordinary day that belongs entirely to them. The empath who gave genuinely and depleted genuinely and went quiet genuinely is now in the silence they created by reaching their limit, in possession of something they have not had in a significant period of time, their own life fully available to them, not waiting to resume. Once the avoidance collapse produces action, not organized around the question of what the recognition in the avoidance interior will eventually become. Actually, there's actually happening. Right now, in the specific and irreplaceable hours of a day that does not require the avoidance participation to be real. What they do with that, how they receive the return of their own attention, how they invest the energy that was going into the dynamic, whether they build genuinely or simply wait in a different configuration. That is the only question that actually matters, not as a strategy for producing the avoidance return, as the basic, necessary, entirely available, right now act of someone who has given enough to someone else and is now, finally, giving something to themselves in their own life. Completely. That is what the silence was always trying to produce, not the collapse in the avoidant, the return to themselves. That return is available. Now, it has always been available. The only question is whether they are willing to fully arrive in it.